Lizette Coley, and I'm Vice President of Parapsychology Foundation. And on behalf of our Board of Trustees, and along with our President, Mrs. Eileen Coley, we welcome you all here with us this evening. We are seated within the Eileen J. Garrett Research Library, and it's a very fine facility, and we urge you all to use it whenever in the area. It's under the very capable direction of Dr. Joanne McMahon, who perhaps many of you know, and if not, I think she's a person that you particularly want to know. We're very happy this evening to bring you the second of our Perspective series. This series has been designed to offer us all a glimpse of the many facets of parapsychological research and the personalities involved. Now, we're very happy this evening to have as our speaker Dr. Vaughan. He's a very rare combination because he's a noted author, researcher, and himself a gifted psychic. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn you over to our president, Mrs. Eileen Coley, who's had a lot of experience with gifted psychics, as she's the daughter of our founder, Eileen Garrett. So, Mrs. Coley.
Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy you can join us this evening with our old friend and colleague, Dr. Alan Vaughan. It's a great pleasure to welcome him here too, since he's not in New York all that often. I'm not going to take any more of your time, really, just to say that it's we've known Alan for so long. He worked with my mother, Eileen Garrett. He's been a researcher and a colleague associated with the Foundation for many, many years, Alan. So I will turn you over now to Alan.
Thank you very much. Well, tonight I'd like to start out with a little preview of what's in my book, Doorways to Higher Consciousness. It took 30 years to write. That is to say, 30 years to do the research, and then 6 weeks to do the first draft. But it's the first 30 years that are hardest. It all began when I met Eileen Garrett. I was here in New York working as a textbook editor, a skeptic. I saw an advertisement for the International Journal of Parapsychology. It was published by the Foundation. I subscribed and wrote a letter then saying, well, who has a good library on prophecy? And I got the reply back, well, Mrs. Garrett has a wonderful library. Come and meet her. And so I did, and we had lunch at a wonderful place called the Baroque. She said, well, how's your research going? I've been researching now in your library for a time. I said, well, I've run out of books. Now I've got to find people who can do this, who can prophesy, because prophecy was my particular fascination. And she says, oh, I suppose I'll have to give you a grant. I thought, gee, what if her board of directors doesn't go along with her? But it turns out that whatever she said went. So she sent me off to Europe for a couple of years. I was studying mediumship in England, especially mediums' ability to predict the future. And also I went off to Germany and to Holland to study. At that time, my idea of mediums was gained from the movies, you know, the dark seance room and the spooky goings-on and people holding hands around a circle, mumbling something. Well, it turned out that was completely erroneous. That you just sit there in a regular room talking with somebody, and the medium would kind of open up. More of them were female than male, but there were quite a few males too. They would try to get a track on your consciousness and to bring through entities on the other side. But my project was, can they predict the future? So they would, when I asked that, they said, well, we can't prophesy world events, but we can make some predictions about you. And so I became a precognitive guinea pig. And I tape recorded all these sessions. So I think I had about 1,000 sessions for several years and saw every kind of psychic you can imagine. There was even a lady who did something strange with the tail of an elephant. I never could figure that one out. But 3 of the mediums told me, oh, one day you're going to be doing this too. You're going to channel an entity named Li Sung, Chinese guy. I said, over my dead body, not me. But 15 years later, when I was, after many years of research, learning how to do very psychic things, then I was a trainer in Sedona, helping people develop their psychic abilities, working with Dick Sutphin. And we did a day on past lives. And a couple came up to me and said, well, can you tell us anything about our past lives? And at that time I was even editor of Reincarnation Report, but I said, well, I'm kind of skeptical about this myself. But, before I could get the words out of my mouth, I went into trance. And Li Sung started coming through. It was a strange experience for me. I guess I had feared that, it would be like possession, but it wasn't. It was, I used the term co-consciousness. It was like joined with me, but it was a wonderful feeling of energy accompanying this. And he began to talk to them through me about their past lives and how they affected the present situation, and described a number of things in the present that in fact they confirmed to be true. And the next day, I was totally astonished. The next day, Dick Sutphin said, well, gee, I want a reading too. And I said, well, I'll see if he'll come. And sure enough, all I had to do was to close my eyes, and then I would hear and sense Li Sung being there within a moment or two. Well, this was the beginning for me for an exploration of what you might call channeling, and it opened a lot of doors for me. The first technical research I did was at the Society for Psychical Research in London. And it was an old building on Adam and Eve Mews. I love that address, number 1, of course. And it had an attic, and I would go up there and look amongst the unpublished files. And so many years later, I asked the question, well, how should I do this book, Doorways to Higher Consciousness? At that time, I had a different title for it. And then I had a dream in which there was a door plastered into this attic, and I ripped the door open. I thought it didn't belong there. And suddenly through the door came this incredible light and blue sky, and a butterfly fluttered in through the doorway. And I thought, oh, that's the soul. I felt that the soul was a symbol of the butterfly was a symbol of the soul set free. And that kind of crystallized my own point of view about this. So what I've attempted to do is to show how all these phenomena that we call psychic are really related to each other and related to one thing, which is, well, there are different names for it. I call it the higher self. 2,000 years ago, St. Paul called it the Holy Spirit. And he listed the gifts of the Spirit, these in a letter to the Corinthians, saying, here are some things you should be doing. Achieving wisdom, knowledge, by channeling the Holy Self, the Holy Spirit, prophesying. Now what he meant by prophesying, and it's clear because he describes exactly what goes on there, is what today we call doing a psychic reading. Picking up information about a person that can be positive. The word in English is ennobling. And also it can be used to strike terror into the hearts of the skeptics, when you tell them something is true. So things have not changed. Healing was a very important aspect of the gifts of spirit. Working miracles. Oh, and he said there was one more, speaking in tongues, but he didn't approve of that because nobody could understand what you're saying. And said, don't bother with that. Instead, why don't you prophesy? Well, what is interesting to me is that he said that all these various phenomena come from the same thing, from the Holy Spirit. And I think from a parapsychological point of view, if we put that in modern language, it's got the basic point. And things haven't changed. So in my approach, I have tried to learn how to do every single thing that one can do. And starting from the point of view of a skeptic, really, maybe it's possible, maybe not. Let me see if I can try to do it. And so I've worked with researchers in a dozen laboratories over, it's been 30 years now, and find that it is possible to do this. And then I've taught other people how to do it. If you saw the flyer, there's a very long list of. Does anybody have one of those flyers? Yeah. There's a very long list of things which seem to be connected.
Is it?
No, it's not. Hey, you think you have it, but you don't. Yes, that's it. Yeah, the very flyer, the pink one. I think they ran out tonight. All right. Healing, life after death, mediumship, channeling, trance entities, prophecy. And to that we can add ESP, clairvoyance, telepathy, precognition, which is another term for prophecy, psychokinesis, which is connected with healing and with working miracles. In other words, both mental and physical psychical phenomena are all coming from this same consciousness. And I use channeling as a model for all of this. If, for instance, we're receiving information directly from our higher self, our true soul consciousness, this can be directed toward an object. Let's say that book there, Alternate Realities. We can maybe not read it word for word, but we can apprehend the substance of that book directly through our consciousness. We can call that clairvoyance. Or if somebody else is reading the book, we can get involved with their experience and we'll call it telepathy. If we become aware of that book being chosen by random chance in the future, then it's precognition. And those are laboratory classifications. They're very useful for doing experiments. But when it comes to real life, we really are not, it doesn't make too much difference what we call it. We want to know, does it work for us? Can it provide us with information that is going to enable us to see our best choices in our careers, in our relationships, in our insights? And this is, I think, what channeling can do. Now, some of you may have seen preposterous people on TV, tromping around and yelling about ancient civilizations and think, well, that's all there is to it. But it's not. Those people tend to be entertainers rather than actual psychics. In the research I've done, I found that very often the people who don't advertise, they don't make any grand claims, they're often quietly doing this, that, or the other, but they can give you an incredible amount of information that is very helpful in leading your life. Of course, my research project had to do, I really didn't care one way or the other if this came true or not. I was doing a research project. But at least at first, but after a while, they kept saying, gee, you're going to write a book. And then you're going to write other books about the first book. And Doorways to Higher Consciousness is book number 7. So I did become interested in it after a while. And I found that when the mediums agreed, in other words, when there was a consensus that several of them said the same thing, then that would tend to happen. Of course, it depended on me too to do all the work, all this writing. They were also able to predict other things as well. And indeed, I have to point out that many times they would predict things which did not happen. I think that's because there was a chance of it to happen, that the future is pliable, but they looked at a future which in fact did not come into reality. And I think you have to keep that in mind too, that if our lives were planned down to every single decision, in other words, if it were all set in concrete, that there would be no point at all in looking at it. It would be like looking at summer reruns on television. What a bore. But if we are shown, however, the possibilities which may happen, especially those possibilities which happen because of our actions and work and focus and concentration and our achievements, then it can be extremely valuable. People often have no idea of their possible futures. And I know in my work, I work both as a researcher and as a professional intuitive or psychic. And I'm always intrigued, when I'll see an image for somebody and they'll say, I have no idea what you're talking about here. It doesn't seem very likely. And I talk to them 2 years later, and it's happened. Oh yeah, for instance, and it's not always easy to tell the time. That's just an estimate. I think of one moment I saw in Los Angeles. They said, I see you working in a place where you're making little books. I said, oh, that's impossible. I ran into her 5 years later. She said, oh, I got a job in San Francisco. I was making passport booklets. So, well, there it is. Now, my guide, Lee Sung, often, he looks at things from a different point of view, more from the spiritual point of view. But every now and then, he'll make a comment as well about someone's material work. Recall one fellow who was out of a job. He'd just been thrown out of his apartment because he hadn't paid the rent, destitute, and he asked Lee Sung, well, what can I do? And I was in trance. I could avoid the whole thing, of course. But Lee Sung said through me, oh, well, I see that you could become a video producer and that you can write a column for a magazine. He said, well, yeah, sure. He called me up 2 years later. He had a job for the top video company in America. He said, oh, I just love this job. He was writing a column for a magazine on video, and he was a completely transformed person. Now, I can't say that he wouldn't have gotten the idea some other way, but at that time, he just thought, I've had it, I'm on the streets, but he made it. So I think we all have little secrets that we keep, that our future selves keep from our present selves. There may be a reason for that. If, for instance, we had perfect foreknowledge of everything that was going to happen in our life, we might have a tendency just to sit down in our armchairs and say, well, I'll just wait for it. It's just like a bus, sooner or later be here. But somehow it doesn't work that way. That you only are given in your prevision, and people often have their own previsions in dreams or hunches, just a knowing, an intuition, but just so far. Or they might have an intuition of the final goal. If you look at the biographies of people who have achieved great things, you often find that as children, they had a knowing of what they were going to do. One of my favorite examples is of Dunn, who, J.W. Dunn, he wrote a book on precognition, on his dreams. But when he was about 10 or 11 years old, he had a dream about flying in an airplane. Now, this was an airplane that he had invented. And 20 years later, he became an aviation expert. He designed an airplane. And, of course, it took a lot of people to put together this airplane, but he was riding in it and kind of excited because, after about 30 seconds, the engine cuts out and you have to start gliding, you hope. So it was a very dramatic moment. But this was exactly the plane that he had dreamt about as a kid. So we all have these potential accomplishments in the future. We may just know a little bit of it, though. Now, the energy that makes it happen is, I think, the same energy that is used for healing. It's all one energy. And tonight, I hope you'll have the opportunity to feel that energy yourself. And here I don't mean the heat. It'd be easy to fool yourself, but rather kind of a psychic tingling energy. When we're able to gather as a group and kind of open up our consciousness, that people, each member of the group often feels more energized psychically, so that they're able to perceive things for themselves and for others. It's just part of the process. Now, life after death is also connected with this, because it's our consciousness that survives death. And of course, there are many people who think, well, prove it. It's not, when I was a textbook editor, there were no textbooks that said, oh yes, you survive life after death, and here's how it is. No, not a single one. But research, and psychical research, has shown that in fact there's a lot of evidence for this. One of the last night I was out on 4th Street looking at a theater marquee and thinking, oh, now the person who runs that theater is a very talented medium, but nobody knows it. Because 30 years ago, she channeled in ancient Greek, letter by letter, poetry that was describing a rite of Eleusis, which was a sacred rite, and if you talked about it, you were put to death. So, of course, nobody talked. And I was able to, as a Greek scholar in college, I knew some Greek, so I was able to translate this and was positively astonished. And what was intriguing was that she could supply answers to questions. Somebody would ask her a question in English, and she'd give the response in this ancient Koine Greek. Well, she had no training. I mean, before that, she had designed bathing suits. And she keeps it. She's obviously not trying to make any money at it, because she's made huge amounts of money other ways, and just wants to keep it quiet. But that's a very convincing thing. The message that was channeled finally had to do with the person, her roommate, around whom this language seemed to be centered. And it was described, the great god Pan was finally described. And he was astonished at that, because he was an artist, and he was working on this bas relief of the great god Pan. And a technique that he had never tried before, with molded sand, like a three-dimensional thing. So somehow this writing in ancient Greek was talking about the sort of thing that he was creating. It said, oh, it's a past life of him. Could be. But here was somebody who, without any training, had the natural ability to bring through an information that is not only evidential, but it was very helpful. A survey, for instance, of widows, women who had lost their husbands, found that 2/3 of them had reported contact with their deceased husbands. Well, if that's not natural, what is? I mean, when 2/3 of people have this experience, you have to say, well, it's like getting married or something. It's not really not that weird. It may not work out, but everybody should try it at least once. Well, it's interesting in our society, and I'm sure I don't want to be lecturing to the choir here, but such an emphasis has been put on the development and use of logic that disparagement has been put on the use of creativity, intuition, and psychic abilities. And so the New York Times has no problem at all with reporting experiment that's gives negative results, if it has anything to do with healing or alternative healing or ESP, they love that stuff. But I can assure you, though, if anybody got positive results, they just pretend it didn't exist. They're not interested. And so it's really up to us, though, to admit to ourselves that we all have these capabilities and to look for them, to be open to them, that you can train them. I've in a sense, trained myself, and I've had quite a few teachers. It's not just by myself. Well, to do things like, healing. I had several teachers working with me on that. Using psychokinesis to, for instance, affect a magnetometer. This is a device that measures magnetic fields. And they would surround it by liquid helium, which would block off any known radiation. And I just go, zap, and the thing would move. And they tried 100 people who couldn't do a thing with it, but I put on my Mickey Mouse shirt, as Sorcerer's Apprentice, Mickey Mouse, and said, all right, we'll do it. With a lot of enthusiasm, and it seemed to work. I remember one morning I came in with a terrible hangover. This was about 20 years ago. And I said, I don't know if I can do this. And I thought, oh, well, wait a minute, why don't I just heal myself? So I did a meditation, for a healing meditation. The headache went away. And then it was that same energy, though, that I was able to use to affect the magnetometer. This was at Stanford Research Institute, which has since changed its name to SRI. At the Dream Laboratory here in New York, in Brooklyn, Maimonides, we did experiments not only in psychic dreaming about the present and looking at telepathic targets. When somebody's in another room looking at a picture, you're kind of eavesdropping and dreaming about what they're looking at, and you make up a story about it. And then they would hand us pictures in envelopes and said, all right, describe this. And you have no idea what it could be, but you just start talking, and as you're talking, you see a mental image. And then later on, you are shown, let's say, 5 pictures, of which one is a copy of the one that was in the envelope, and then you're asked to pick out, now, which one was the picture? Now, I and many other people were able to do experiments like this. It's interesting that many of us had never tried it before. You just don't know till you try. They don't have it. There's no context in public schooling to investigate your intuitive abilities. The teachers say, don't guess. Well, hell, that's how you get the right answer. Well, for me personally, the fulfillment of the prediction about Lee Sung coming to me, I guess, was the most emotional milestone. And because it's given me a whole different perspective on it. I had started as a little hard-nosed skeptic. You got to prove this and you got to prove that. And of course, all of his parapsychologists love to bicker and, quarrel and so on. And there are no general theories that are absolutely accepted. I mean, it's up for grabs because the scientific elite, will just have none of it. Every now and then you will get some high-powered scientist who does pay attention, but the mediocre scientist, the one in the middle, they feel threatened by it, so they don't want to look at it. Well, so we really have to lead the way, and I think into applications. At least that's my personal feeling, that we don't have to know exactly how this works. We can have a model for it if we feel comfortable with it. From my experience, if you do something often enough, you get used to it. And you don't have to explain it to yourself. And so let me just ask, how many of you have had some sort of psychic experience? Well, I think we have about 80. I bet, thank you. I think we, went from person to person and really looked at your life. I think you might find that you had some experiences that you might call spooky or intuitive or synchronistic, that are coincidental, the phone ringing and you know who it is, that sort of thing. But these are all little indications that you have this ability. Now, I've trained or done testing with over 10,000 people in many years. And about 85, 90% of people are able to do successfully invocation of their intuitive abilities, like describing, when you meet a stranger, being able to describe that person. Primary thing I think we need to know, though, is how to get in touch with ourselves. I mean, that's where you have to start from. And I think it's so helpful to be able to realize that you have access to a higher consciousness, your own higher self. And that whether you shut your eyes and go into trance and move around a lot, or you're just sitting simply at your desk and you're saying, gee, I wonder what's going to be with that person. Whatever question you answer, you ask, can be answered with that intuitive faculty, with your higher self. And so you have to explore that. You really have to learn how to depend on it. But first you have to open up to the idea that you got one. So to me, my dream of the butterfly coming through, that hole, that doorway in the Society for Psychical Research was, for me, a symbol that we don't have to go to mediums to find out if it's possible to contact consciousness. We can, each of us, do it ourselves. This is too important to leave to professionals. I mean, this is something we all have to participate in, even if it is only just contacting our own higher selves.
Hi there, I'm Lisette Coley. I'm president of Parapsychology Foundation, so welcome to our YouTube channel. We have lots to look at, so please check out our videos. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.